Good afternoon and welcome to this showcase session on modernising spectrum and telecommunications management. Thank you for joining us. I am Colin Thompson, Head of Infrastructure with Access Partnership. Access Partnership is the leading public policy consultancy firm focusing exclusively on the technology sector. We obtain and maintain market access approvals for our clients' technologies and services, and we monitor regulatory change to identify the risk and opportunities this presents for our clients' business. Our clients include private and public sector stakeholders, as well as investors in technology infrastructure. At the start of this year, we at Access developed a white paper on spectrum management, national policies, technology advances, and best practices. The paper is available for download for your reference via our website, www.accesspartnership.com. And this presentation provides a high-level overview of the issues addressed in the paper. So Access Partnership is formed of 4 practices. We focus on infrastructure, we focus on data policy and trust, we focus on compliance and market intelligence, and we also have a multilateral organizations practice. What this allows us to do is to track a technology through each stage of its life cycle, from a nascent concept all the way through to obsolescence. We are able to work with our clients to support that journey and maintain market access approvals and compliance throughout that period. We have offices in 6 countries around the world: the UK, the United States in Washington, DC, Brussels, Abu Dhabi in the UAE, Senegal in West Africa, and in Singapore. And in addition to this, we are supported by a number of partners throughout the North America and Latin America, in the Middle East, and in Asia. Now to the topic at hand. Can we go to the first slide, please? The issue slide. So the issue that we want to talk about today, why are we talking about it? Well, in the current climate with the pandemic, connectivity solutions have moved center stage of the policy discussion, and in particular, in relation to the future of work discussion. Increased availability of affordable connectivity solutions for business to business, business to consumer, business to government, machine to machine communications are here. There's an ever expanding suite of cloud-based services and applications, in addition to voice, data, and video content, which is continuing to create increased demand for communications to support all facets of life, both at home, at work, and at play. In response, policymakers are increasingly sensitive to the importance of excellent telecommunications infrastructure to deliver on the policy objectives relating to economic productivity, medical services, education, social inclusion, social mobility, transportation, and defence and security, and other applications and other requirements. Now, this presentation explores how improved spectrum management practices and the application of technology can help to meet and address some of those challenges. Can we move to the next slide, please? The background slide. So as mentioned, increased demand is driving the need to modernise spectrum management practices. Now, We understand that spectrum management is the practice of managing the use of radio spectrum to maximize the commercial and societal return on the use of frequencies while ensuring that technologies and services can coexist with the minimum interference impact to each other. Access to radio spectrum has traditionally been granted by governments assigning spectrum for use by different users and applications through administrative licensing. Release of spectrum is commonly included by both command and control, as well as by market-driven spectrum release models, resulting in licensees having the rights of use of radio spectrum in specific geographic areas and for a fixed period of time. Now, recognizing the ever-increasing demand that future use of spectrum resources for machine-to-machine communications will far exceed the needs for communication between individuals, there is now a very real need to modernize spectrum management practices. And we're now going to investigate some of the regulatory and technical options available for doing just that. May we move to the next slide, please? The spectrum management regulatory tools. Now, it's clear that one regulatory solution, one spectrum access solution, is not universally applicable to all services and all applications. And understandably, technologists and innovators and regulatory authorities have pushed to create different licensing models for different technologies and applications. The one that's most commonly applied today is the licensed spectrum access, and this is common for the regulatory authorities to license the spectrum on a nationwide basis in a particular bandwidth or block of frequencies for a set period of time. Now, this approach continues to be well suited to frequencies with excellent propagation characteristics and for applications with regulatory obligations for the provision of universal service. But we also have a need for unlicensed access to spectrum. Unlicensed spectrum has well understood to have incredible economic benefit, driving innovations and the generation of new innovative business plans to support the economy. Unlicensed access normally involves a set of frequencies that do not have exclusive access to the band and can be used by anyone so long as they adhere to the underlying technical and regulatory framework for access. Unlike licensed spectrum, which authorizes its use through organizations for a specific purpose. Unlicensed access, as I'm sure you all know, is widely used. It's a widely used and cost-effective solution for to additional licensed spectrum for technologies and innovators. These bands are typically used, are commonly used by Wi-Fi, for short-range devices, for microwave ovens, and a host of other emerging technologies. Now, in addition to licensed access and unlicensed access, in recent years, we have seen an increasing application of a tiered licensed access models in different countries around the globe. Examples of this have included the VHF and UHF television band white spaces, where there has been either licensed or unlicensed access by white spaces, or broadcast white spaces, where the unlicensed TV white space devices access the spectrum without increasing the interference environment to the incumbent broadcast users. In the United States, we've seen the CBRS band, the 3.5, 3.7 gigahertz band in the United States, being accessed by three levels of users. While the incumbent military and satellite services are protected, the FCC has managed to release an additional block of spectrum, or blocks of 10 megahertz of spectrum, for local LTE networks, while ensuring the protection of the incumbent, and releasing further spectrum through general authorized access for unlicensed use. Now, this was made possible through the application of sensing and geolocation technologies, and the adoption of those technologies in the national regulatory framework. As the pressure continues for access to spectrum, there will of course be a continued need for licensed access to spectrum for different technologies, not only terrestrial cellular technology. We understand that 5G is going to be a network of networks, so it will include things like the fixed and mobile satellite services, the fixed service, and other services. And of course, there is an ongoing push for access to additional spectrum for Wi-Fi applications, including in the 6 gigahertz band. That requirement will only increase, and I think we'll all agree that in the current environment, with the pandemic and the necessity for people to work remotely, the need for increased availability of Wi-Fi will only continue. But we also recognise that as we migrate to mid-band and higher band frequencies, there will be an increased need to come up with innovative regulatory solutions, such as tiered licensed access, which is readily applicable when use of deployment of incumbent users is limited geographically or for a specific period of time, and it allows ready and seamless access to spectrum by other users, either on a localized or a time-dependent basis. So they are some of the regulatory tools which are available to administrations, and which administrations are seeking to implement. These are the trends we're seeing. If we could move to the next slide, which focuses on the technology advances improving spectrum management. What we're seeking to do here is to lay out the journey of a typical bit of data through to the generation of the content, to its capture, its transmission, storage, processing, and analysis. Now, service providers and technology innovators, it's in their best interests to get the most bang for their buck. They want to generate the most amount of revenue they can for, or per hertz or per megahertz of bandwidth to which they have authorized access. In order to improve the efficiency of their products and services. There's been, in recent years, there's been a massive amount of innovation. Now, this includes MIMO antennas, the development of ultra-dense networks, the development of millimeter wave radios, which have access to larger bandwidths than the commercial low band mobile frequencies, the development of software-defined radios, improvements in the understanding of communication fundamentals and propagation, and developments in 5G, such as network slicing. At the same time, relating to the storage, there's a move online and to store data in the cloud, which is increasing the number of applications for which connectivity and broadband connectivity is necessary. And there's also a move to multiple access edge computing, improving the quality of service and reducing latency in networks. Now, on the processing side, we are seeing the adoption or application of geolocation databases and spectrum technology, spectrum sensing technology to drive innovation, where it's only possible to share spectrum without impacting the interference environment if the users of the spectrum and administrations understand how the spectrum is used, for which purpose, where it's used, and when it's used. Only once we have we're furnished with that information can we make informed spectrum sharing choices, and only then can we develop the algorithms and frameworks necessary to make spectrum more readily accessible, more readily shared, and to make access to spectrum more effective and more efficient. And then, of course, on the analysis side, we're entering the age of machine learning and AI, and those technologies will only go to improve efficiencies in not only in spectrum efficiency, and but also relating to network performance and network optimization. And we're seeing some of that in the development of software-defined networks. So may we now go to the slide on the benefits of applying technology to spectrum management. So, as we've said, increased demand is driving the need to modernize spectrum management practices. Some of the benefits that this delivers for governments as well as for service providers are that it reduces the speed to market and the agility of deployment. It enables the seamless protection of incumbent users while releasing spectrum for use by other services and applications. It improves spectrum efficiency through opportunistic spectrum access on a geographic and time-dependent basis, and it stimulates innovative business plans and the creation of robust and sizable ecosystem of suppliers and vendors. Can we move to the next slide, please? So, if we look at spectrum management best practices holistically, of course, there is a continued need to harmonise the use of radio frequencies for specific services regionally and internationally across the globe. Where spectrum has been identified for a specific use, administrations, we believe, should stick to those frequencies. They shouldn't uh, they shouldn't assign spectrum for one application which isn't covered in the in the radio regulations, or isn't identified for a specific purpose in the radio regulations. Doing so uh, only changes the interference environment locally and regionally, and it causes confusion in the marketplace from an investment perspective. Now, the use of technologies, as we've discussed, facilitates market access for incumbent and emerging services and improves the spectrum efficiency to ensure it's utilised most effectively. At an international level, the ITU radio regulations remain absolutely relevant, an absolutely relevant reference for best practice of spectrum management. And we believe that because of their founding principles. The founding principles require that administrations, that member states limit the number of frequencies and spectrum used for a particular application. They also require that administrations endeavour to apply the latest technological advances as soon as possible to drive spectrum efficiency. As I've mentioned, technology innovators and service providers have a real interest to get the most bang for their buck, to use spectrum most efficiently, to generate increased financial return for the spectrum resources that they have. The radio regs also require that the frequencies and, of course, the associated satellite orbits they're limited resources, and they must be used rationally, efficiently, and economically. And that the operation of any radio station must be done in a way so that it does not cause harmful interference to the services of other member states. Now, the application of modern spectrum management practices and the application of the most up-to-date technologies can ensure that member states meet all of these requirements. So, if I would now like to move to the conclusions, so if we can move to the final slide, please. So, the demand for connectivity stems from all areas of society, and as the availability of cloud-based services, applications, and content expands, so will the need for additional capacity to accommodate it. And the ITU radio regulations and principles upon which they are founded, they continue to provide a useful framework for best practice spectrum management for national regulatory bodies. The adoption and application of technology can significantly improve spectrum efficiency and increase effectiveness of how it is used by reducing time to market, agility of deployment, seamless protection of incumbent users, and stimulation of innovation and attracting new business plans. And finally, the challenge of delivering existing and future spectrum needs will be significantly reduced through the application of modern spectrum management best practice. And with that, I conclude my presentation for this afternoon. I hope that you've found it informative, and I will now like to open the floor for questions.
Hi, Colin. Hi, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for joining. Colin, great presentation, very informative. We have some quick questions here while we're waiting for the system to load and bring on a bit more. So maybe first off, are spectrum sharing technology suited to all frequency bands, or is it otherwise?
So to answer that, there's not a one-size-fits-all solution to all frequency bands. And in determining and deciding where and how spectrum is best utilized and how access to spectrum is best managed, we have to look at the objectives of the release of that spectrum. Where it's universal service and you need national coverage, then of course it may not, while sharing may or may not be technically possible, it may not be appropriate to allow sharing because of universal service objectives, for example. But as we move to, but at the same time, you wouldn't use a mid-band or a millimeter wave band or a higher frequency band to develop
Just bringing myself up here because I think we have lost Colin a moment. So I'm just going to remove him from the stream and see if he is able to come back. I assume it's just his internet connection. So Colin, if you can hear me, perhaps if you can just refresh your page and come back into the studio. I think I just saw him move, so I'm going to bring him back up. Colin, I think we've got you back.
Yeah, I'm back. Did we get my previous answer, or did I lose you?
We didn't, I'm afraid. Your voice went a bit funny, I think, but I'll leave it back to you and Renuka now.
Okay, so there isn't one size fits all solution, and it'll be driven by the objectives, the policy objectives of the spectrum release, and of course, it will also be driven by the technology which is being used to deliver on that objective. So there's no one size fits all solution.
Great, and I think you dropped off somewhere where you were discussing the millimeter wave band and how sharing might be a bit different for that, especially when it comes to universal service obligations. Do you want to describe that a bit more? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so so universal service is can be delivered using different tools. So we're seeing innovation in the satellite industry with the development of high throughput, high capacity satellites, which are ideal for delivering universal service. Among other things, they're now a competitive platform for the delivery of broadband in urban and suburban areas, and that's been witnessed in the uptake of that type of capacity in the wake of this pandemic. In this terrestrial cellular world, you wouldn't use millimeter wave or mid-band frequencies to develop a nationwide network. The cost of the number of base stations required to implement that are just prohibitive. So there's at a terrestrial level, because spectrum propagation characteristics at higher bands are not as the radio waves travel shorter distances, the higher the frequency, and the opportunities for sharing become more abundant.
Great. Yeah. So we have a question from the audience member. They're asking, how do you think spectrum management will look like in 20 years with the introduction of these new technologies? Will AI and other technologies take over from the traditional human spectrum manager? That's a interesting question.
It is an interesting question, and to answer that, I think that there will still be a human requirement. Ultimately, humans will be responsible for identifying the technology which can improve spectrum management effectiveness and efficiencies. But I don't imagine a time when a technology makes the policy decisions for the regulators. If we look at what's happening today in the CBRS band and to some extent in the TV band white spaces, the application of technology is improving spectrum efficiency, and as technology matures, its application to spectrum management and network management will only increase. So in 20 years' time, I would anticipate that there will be more spectrum management will be more automated than it is today, but it will not be. It won't run the show. The setting the policy objectives and identifying the technologies to deliver upon those will still require require humans, and also the strategic the strategic purposing of spectrum will still be done by humans. Yeah, whether it's for a government application or for critical infrastructure. I don't imagine that regulators will be automated out of a job.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think with the deployment of these technologies in any field of work, the human touch is definitely necessary. And with that, we have another question that's talking about new innovations. This question is, should new innovations mean we shift the focus from identity of new spectrum bands to instead and shift to look at the role of technology to increase efficiency of bands that are already allocated? I'm guessing this means that, do we look at spectrum bands from the perspective of what technologies can be deployed, or from the increasing the efficiencies of how they are allocated?
So I think that it's both. A large part of our research in our white paper identified different technology innovations which are really being driven by industry to improve spectrum efficiency and the effectiveness of the use of spectrum. As I mentioned, it's funny that they've been around for 100 years, but the radio regs, they're still a pretty good benchmark for our guidance, and the fact that the founding principles require that administrations endeavour to apply the most up-to-date technology to facilitate efficiency and effectiveness in the utilisation of spectrum resources is still applicable today. So I think regulators and service providers and technologists are required to look at their existing spectrum resources. They should refarm those technologies as frequently to ensure that the spectrum is being used most efficiently and effectively. And I guess when that's done, if there is still demand for future for additional spectrum, we would look at the application of technology to determine how best that spectrum is released for whichever application requires it, while protecting the incumbents. But I go back to the point about 5G and the discussion of 5G. 5G is recognized as a network of networks. It's not only terrestrial cellular. There are other communications platforms. Standards bodies. 3GPP has developed non-terrestrial technologies, including high altitude platforms and satellites, and these need to be factored into the regulatory decisions. Yep. So it's a bit of both to answer the question.
Great. So maybe I think that's a great kind of overview of how to actually efficiently allocate the spectrum. I think there are people who are asking about where they can find the white paper. Maybe we can address that later, but maybe one last question. I think for regulators in smaller teams or without the necessary technological resources like AI or blockchain, or who haven't gotten to the stage where they can adopt those, do you have any tips on how they can go about modernizing their spectrum management practices without the use of all these fancy technologies? Yeah.
Yeah, so excuse me, there are, if we look at what's happening if we look at what's happening around the world, and what has happened, such as the access to spectrum for PMSE, access to spectrum for program making and special events, for access to spectrum by television band white spaces, the CBRS band in the States, and the access to additional Wi-Fi resources in the lower and upper 6 gigahertz band. Many administrations have implemented those technology advances in the regulatory framework, both in Asia, and internationally, in North America and Europe, in Africa and in Latin America. And what that means is that a number of administrations and service providers, network operators, they've done the heavy lift to develop the best practice for spectrum regulation. And I think for smaller countries or countries which don't have access to resources to develop the framework on their own, there's ample opportunity for those administrations to refer to international best practice. Have I lost you?
Minorly. Yes, thanks a lot, Colin. So I think that seems to be all the questions we have. I think the last question is, where can people find the white paper you have been speaking about?
As I mentioned in my introductory remarks, the white paper is available for download from our website, which is www.accesspartnership.com. Yeah, so it's available for download from there. Alternatively, people can write to me at Colin@Access Partnership, and I will forward it on to them. Many thanks, Renuka.
Thank you, Colin. Thank you, everyone, for listening today.